Thank you, Amit. I'll request my panelists to join me on the dais. We'll start quickly so that we are on time, and we'll try and keep as much time as possible for the audience to interact with it. So first, I'll request Ms. Maya Nair to join us. Anywhere. Maybe at the center, keep the other men in control. So she's the CISO of Idea Cellular. She's also worked with Geo Infocom. She's also been with Sybil, and she has years and years of experience dealing with threat intelligence, looking at perimeter security, looking at security operations.
When you say years and years, you make me look like an extremely old person, okay?
So she's not very old, but she's extremely experienced, is what I was trying to get, right? And she's planning a few attacks on this, so we'll try and deflect some of those attacks. In fact, we already had a breach with her when she got one of these. Hers was the only one which was winking, while the rest of us have both the eyes. So she immediately took out the battery and managed that risk very quickly. Next is Mr. Sarvade. Mr. Sarvade is luckily somebody I have known for longer than the other panelists. He's basically from the Indian Police Service, but he, for some strange reason, decided to leave policing and get into the corporate world, and he's been with ICICI Bank. Then he was heading Data Security Council of India, and he's also currently he's the CEO of Rebit, which is a subsidiary of Reserve Bank of India, which looks exclusively at cybersecurity issues, both from a implementation perspective as well as from a policy making input perspective. And Mr. Sarvade is also somebody who took on, in some ways, to try and get people from the police service onto the internet, get them to start discussing technologies, and runs probably two of the biggest platforms, both on information security as well as policing. And he has the onerous task of moderating both these once in a while. And our third panelist is Sudhir. Sudhir is heading the security engineering services of Flipkart, and he has a background in Amazon, where he was looking at AWS. He's a little new to security from what we just had a quick discussion, but he's now looking at a whole gamut of security operations. And so far, Flipkart was in sort of a startup mode, as we just found out, but he's been brought in by the leadership to try and put it into some kind of shape. And we'll be looking at some of the challenges that he is facing and see how we are dealing with threats as well as regulation which come together. So the idea of this discussion was, let's say today you have somebody with a telecom company which also holds a payments bank license. So as a telecom company, I am critical information infrastructure, so I have to deal with NCIIPC. Because I have a whole gamut of customers, I have to deal with certain. Because I have a payments bank, I have to deal with RBI. Because I also am in the telecom sector, I have to deal with TRAI. So suddenly you find that today CISOs and people in security teams have to deal with tons and tons of regulation, do a lot of compliance, live up to a lot of standards, but somewhere down the line, it starts affecting real cybersecurity. So we've got this excellent panel of experts, and we'll throw a few of these questions at them and see how they look at it from various kinds of perspectives. But I would like to just also issue a disclaimer on their behalf. Please note that everybody is speaking in their personal capacity and not taking an institutional position. So at no point should anybody consider whatever they say on the dais as reflecting what their institution says. If they want to say anything on behalf of the institution, they will clarify that this is an institutional position. So please don't quote, and if anybody from the media, my brethren, start quoting them that CISO Idea Cellular said, oh, we have been breached, that's incorrect, and that will be immediately countered. So, ma'am, if you could have a few opening remarks. How do you look at regulation and go the whole hog, curse them as much as you want? That
regulation is something that we kind of live by every day, because as Saikath rightly pointed out at the beginning, we have so many regulations to follow. Just one correction there with respect to my organization. We are not holding the payment bank license. That's with another entity of the same group. But still, the number of regulations that we have to follow is really countless. And sometimes what happens is these are non-negotiable things. Okay, when the regulator says that your license says that you are supposed to do these things, that becomes a non-negotiable thing. So somewhere in this mad rush to comply to the regulation, the actual cybersecurity takes a backseat. Because you have a long checklist to complete, and you have a long list of things to do, and then get back to the regulator and prove that, okay, we have done these things. But if you ask me whether that will help us protect ourselves to a large extent, I'm really not sure. Because in spite of those things, the regulator says there are a lot more things that we still have to do. Sometimes we don't get time to do those things which may be more relevant when it comes to cybersecurity. So this, I know this is kind of a negative opening remark, but still.
A quick question, if I may. So is it an issue of capacity that regulation is putting too much of pressure while you have limited capacity? Or is it basically the complexity of regulation is such that you have so much of trouble?
I would say that the regulators and the people who tell us to do stuff, they have not coordinated well amongst themselves. Because if regulator 1 says, say 100 things to be done, regulator 2 will say another 100 things to be done. Out of these, maybe 70 things are common. But we still prepare a separate report and submit. Another one will say about another 50 things, out of which maybe 20, 30 things are common. So my point is that it is not actually as complex as it looks. But somewhere when you look at the overwhelming set of things that you're supposed to do, it becomes really difficult at times. And if I have a real critical issue in hand, and if I have to reply to a regulator, I would definitely put my team member to work on something so that we can reply to the regulator on time. And maybe a more important thing takes a backseat there. So what I would say is that we can reduce the complexities. It looks to be more complex than actually what it is. We should put in dedicated efforts to make it simpler and to make it only appear what it is and not hype it more than that.
So, Mr. Sarvade, so you've been in the government, but in a slightly different capacity. Then you went into the private sector where you had to deal with regulators. Then you were with an industry association which tries to advise both the government as well as the private sector for basic practices. And now I wouldn't call you the regulator, but at least you're quite close to a very important regulator. So how do you view that? What is the importance of regulation? I guess we can't do without it, but how do we deal with it, listening to what Ms. Nair just mentioned? What would your advice be to people?
So let me repeat the disclaimer. And I was hoping that Mr. Bahel will be here because he is the regulator on cybersecurity. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it in time. But so my role is of providing technology support to a regulator, and I don't intend to interpret any regulatory guidelines or anything. But having seen multiple situations, I think regulation is an important area because of the interconnectedness and the speed of transmission, which is visible now. So I yesterday met a banker who is about to retire, and he was saying that there was a time when banks were standalone branches, not connected to any place. The branch people knew all the customers and they could take care of all the risks which were there. Now, gradually with automation, with connectedness, with core banking, the risks have been accumulating and going up. So financial services banking has always been a very regulated area, and with good reason, because there is something known as the domino effect, as you are aware, where if things start dropping, they may affect a very large set of related entities. So payment systems are connected, and there are many participants in payment systems. And instability in one area may result into exposures, lack of settlement, and so on. So you see, the need for regulation cannot ever be undermined. And that is why I think when the technology is trying to help businesses in areas like fintech and all, there is this dilemma of what to allow, how much to allow, because regulation many times follows the technology, and there are some areas in which there is a luxury to bring in regulation once the technology has stabilized. But in some areas, probably there could be something like sandboxing, regulatory sandboxing, and allow some things on a trial basis and then see whether they can be scaled up, etc. But stepping back on the regulatory issues, I think regulation is much required. I mean, I take my policing background to give an example always. So in India, we have this drive on the left-hand side of the road, which is different from other countries. But once the standard is set, then it has to be followed by everybody. And then come the regulation of stopping at signals and overtaking on a particular side and so on. Now, if this were not there, you can imagine the chaos, because the number of vehicles on the road is going up. And that is the network effect I was talking about. The instability which is coming in can scale up very, very fast. And that's where we need regulation.
Sudhir, you are sort of new to this. And as you said, you are in a bit of a startup mode. And I guess you haven't, but are you looking at regulation? And let's say a lot of people here could be looking at startups, or even if they're in established enterprises, they're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. So what has been your experience, if you could share that with us?
Yeah, Flipkart has existed for we just had our 10-year anniversary. But the last 3-4 years have been an explosive time for Flipkart in terms of growth. We introduced the concept of the Big Billion Days, which has taken off in a big way. The company is like 10x or 20x both in terms of employees, complexity of systems, as well as the amount of customer data that we hold. So from that perspective, there's an organic, there's a need within the company, and there's a realization in the company that cybersecurity is very important. So grounds up, there has always been a small team, I must just stress out the small team of researchers who have been doing yeoman's job there without any direction per se to safeguard customer secrets. So the structure has just started to come in. And as we grow, of course, we process payments. So payments have to be protected. PCI DSS is the bare minimum we need to do. And then we are also incubating a fintech arm. So we have payments, NBFC license. There's different areas that we are starting to invest in which need more structure, more regulation. So the way we are looking at regulation is to bring structure to an unstructured process.
So in a way, you're saying regulation is helping you in some ways to at least bring some order to a lot of processes that you had.
I would say yes and no. It's a mixed bag. The regulation is helping kind of streamline the thought process in terms of at least what are the bare minimum areas that we need to focus on, what is the baseline we need to meet. Okay. And organically we have been meeting that, but it's a validation of the work we have done so far, and also the kind of directionally sets us on the course.
But why did you say no then?
The no part is, it is culturally Flipkart is a fail fast, run fast, fail fast kind of company, which means that we give our developers and the managers freedom to go in all possible directions, explore areas, and then fail. So there's a lot of systems that come up and go. So applying the traditional regulation constructs by picking on pieces doesn't help. So kind of customizing the regulation construct to our very fluid and agile environment has been challenging, where we haven't got much guidance from the industry, from the wider industry, as to how to approach it. So this is something that we are learning as we go in terms of how to adapt it. That's all.
Maya, coming back to you, this is something that when we were discussing this, in traditional security, usually the government or the regulator used to be 2 steps ahead of the private sector or the entities. But here is a sector where suddenly the private entities actually has better knowledge, has better systems, better leeway, and then the regulator tries to catch up with them. So do you find that to be a real situation where at times you are talking to a regulator who probably doesn't know what they're talking about? Do you find that when you're dealing with them?
It's almost never that the regulator doesn't know what they're talking about. They're pretty intelligent that way, but they have their restrictions. Because whenever we talk to them, the common comment that comes in is कि हम लोग government है, we don't move so fast. So as he rightly pointed out, the speed with which things happen when it comes to changes in the regulation is really a problem, I must say. Because if a court of law, even today, asks only for an MD5 hash, it's a problem, because then you have to live in the past and in the present and look towards the future. That becomes a little difficult. So to the specific question that you asked, they do understand where it is lacking, but somehow I think the regulators are not able to move at the pace that they would want to move. And because of that, we are also tied up in a slightly old-fashioned way, and the business wants us to move really fast forward. So that's where we are caught up. This dilemma has to be sorted out at some stage.
And you also mentioned a very, very interesting thing, that at the end of the day, you're running a business, you're not running security. So how do you frame that?
This is where the real dilemma of a CISO comes in. Because my business owner sponsors the security program as well. And if I say no business requirement, because there can be a security loophole, it's not going to. And the very clear directive for us is, if there's a business requirement, you evaluate the security risks. If it is within a risk appetite, go ahead and take that risk. But if it's not within, then maybe we'll have to do something about it. But that something that we'll have to do has to be something which is doable pretty fast and within the budgets, because in the cutthroat competitive environment in which telecom companies operate today, if you say that you have to invest a lot of rupees there, then it becomes a little difficult for us. But the point is that security consideration without looking at the business aspect of it is not going to help. I would say, if between security and business, which one comes first? I would say somewhere business comes first, somewhere security comes first. So this distinction is something that we'll have to judiciously make. If the risk is too much to take, don't take it. But otherwise, you cannot stop the business. Even if the regulator wants you to stop the business, maybe you can't.
But how do you explain this to the regulator?
Hard. Really hard. I do that day in and day out. I go and meet various regulators in various telecom circles. I try to explain them. It's hard, but the point is that if there is a directive from the top, I would say the Ministry of IT or wherever, there is something that we actually need to bifurcate. Okay, we need to secure, no doubt, but there are things which are non-negotiable, and then there are things that are negotiable. Certain things that the organization can take that risk without risking other entities. Okay, if the risk is only contained within you, not affecting the privacy of a subscriber, not affecting any of the interconnecting partners, the organization should be allowed to take that risk. I would say regulations are good because, as you rightly said, it gives us a framework to operate. They can bring some meaning to this madness, so that's good. But we need to know how far and no further.
So I just wanted to comment on the aspect of cost of security. Now, it is very true that security should not outweigh the business. The cost of security should be less than the benefits coming out of it. But cybersecurity is typically a problem with a lot of externalities. So the kind of impact which a data breach has many times is not understood. For the organization, many times if it is not detected and reported, it kind of flies under the radar. So you will see a lot of data being leaked, and the people impacted are the people whose data has been leaked. The organization which has allowed the data to leak because of lax controls sometimes disclaims any responsibility or sometimes hides the fact. Now, in this kind of scenario, with the incentives misaligned, that's where regulation comes in. Regulation on notifying information, data breaches, and then the indirect costs of remediating the breach of, say, reissuing of credentials or monitoring a person's credit profile and those kind of things. That's where the expense happens. But that said, I think it is important to build good infrastructure. To give an example from banking, the KYC requirement, which is there in telecom also, has been one of the primary requirements which puts a lot of costs. And till recently, the KYC infrastructure was very, very weak. With Aadhaar coming in, at least there is some infrastructure which enables quick checks and the onboarding of customers and so on. Till now, and I'm talking from what I saw in banks. If a person applies to a bank for opening an account, the identity documents are submitted in paper, the address proof are submitted in paper, then it goes for field verification. Somebody goes to an address and checks and comes back, and this can happen multiple times wherever the person is applying, and that cost adds into the cost of doing business. So the infrastructure for safe identity management is very, very important, and that's where the cost can go down while improving security.
Honestly, sir, I was about to ask you this question, so how did you know that I was going to ask you this? So this is where I guess that's where the policing comes in play. But I'll just take this question a little forward, sir. Like from a customer or a normal citizen perspective, if my data is held by, say, a Flipkart or Idea or an Airtel or whoever, at the end of the day, I have only that much control, and I would depend therefore on the regulator to protect my interests. And when we start looking at scale, you have a huge, massive responsibility where you have to protect people. And as you mentioned, let's say there is a company which is breached but does not want to reveal that until a regulator goes in, finds it, and then pushes them. So how do you therefore, manage this balance?
I think prevention is the most important part of how security is to be managed. You cannot allow things to happen and then start responding and remediating or reacting to them. That's where I think the knowledge of the regulator of the sector, of the business models, of the technology innovations, of things on the ground becomes very, very important. And the feedback loops which should be there, which can be further strengthened and really help there. So regulators probably look after the prevention part. The response, detection response is something which probably law enforcement is better equipped to handle. But everywhere there is a need for better understanding, better capacity to detect things, to detect them early, to limit the damage, to recover any assets which have been moved out. And so this kind of joint responsibility where regulators, law enforcement work together, and obviously regulators are only going to say, okay, do things in a particular manner. The primary responsibility of ensuring that the data is protected rests on the organization who are processing that data. And that responsibility cannot be shifted just because a regulator happens to be active and so on. So I think if the responsibilities are properly allocated and all parties are well equipped to handle those responsibilities, then we'll see a better regime. Otherwise, the detection happens towards on the law enforcement side when they come across some data trove and so on. And then it is very difficult to trace it back saying where it must have happened. So this, I think, collaboration between these stakeholders is something which is very important.
So
I have a point to add out here because this is one of my favorite topics. See, if the company is not disclosing what they're supposed to disclose after a breach, then the regulator has to act. Or maybe even before that, the regulator should give very clear guidelines about if these kind of breaches happen, within these many hours you have to report. Maybe to the regulator, maybe to the customers who are impacted by this breach, whatsoever. And the media should stop putting mirch masala into that. Media can report. I'm not saying that media should not report. They should report, but report more factually. Because sometimes when you say X company is hacked, it gives a very different view altogether because it may not be a hacking, it may be something else also. So where in case the regulator has not given clear directive to the organization how to report and when to report and whom to report, then that is something that has to be worked out. In spite of that, if the company is still not doing this correct reporting at the correct times, then the regulator always has the power in its hands to cancel the license or to put penalties and things like that. While media should report factually, I repeat, let it be only factual reporting.
So you're saying that if I bring a camera in front of you and ask you for the facts after a breach has taken place in your organization, you will state the facts on camera?
Why would I tell you all the facts?
So you just said that you want the media to report factually.
I'll tell the facts to my customer. If you are an aggrieved party because of the breach, yes, I will tell you.
But you said you want the media to report factually. Without the facts, how will they report factually?
You will definitely get the facts. If I am the spokesperson, definitely there will be a report issued to the media. It's a part of the mass communication.
So you're saying that as a part of your cybersecurity posture, you should also have a response mechanism where the facts can be quickly disseminated.
Exactly. That's how it is. What to be told to the regulator? In fact, the entire truth has to be told to the regulator. What has to be told to the media and what has to be told to the customer? Because you should not create undue panic in the customer's mind also. If the breach is only as much, you report as it is. But let them not panic after hearing that and decide what has to be given to the media. Absolutely. That has to be part of the cybersecurity incident response program.
Perfect. So now let me bring an actual case and I'll throw it to all my panelists and let's see how they react to it. Hitachi Payment Systems, there was a breach. If you look at the interviews given by the CMD, at first there is flat denial that nothing has happened. Subsequently, as the damage starts spreading and more information comes out, consulting company is brought in and there is partial acceptance and partial denial. Then that company which was brought in is then removed and a new company is brought in from Bangalore who have the expertise. And by this time, this company, the affected company, has already deleted a lot of data and a lot of evidence. They've tried to format a lot of evidence, etc., which could have helped in the forensics. But however, that Bangalore-based company manages to find the forensics. They managed to do an internal report. Now the government comes in, and by this time, 3.2 million credit and debit cards have to be recalled by various banks because of this kind of delay. In a situation like this, what would you advise the company to do? Because here, this particular entity is not under any regulator, only the bank is. And therefore, the bank is not able to do something because they have outsourced this. And the media has not been informed. And by the time the media comes to it, the damage is already too late. And we have a parliamentary question where the Minister of Finance says that so many cards have to be recalled, which is in millions and so on and so forth. In such a situation, sir, what should we do if each of the panelists could react to this?
So I would like to mention 2-3 points. One is that the assumption that you can have a fully secure system or enterprise is itself now challenged, and the focus has shifted from prevention to response and recovery. So that is a paradigm shift which is understood by most good organizations and which it will continue to improve. The other point is the in regulation there is a set of regulated entities, and then there are entities which are servicing those regulated entities and they have a contractual relationship. And that is how the regulations are transmitted to parties which are finally doing the activities which are in broadly regulated. Now that is the arrangement which works, and that is how it is managed everywhere. Unless there is an omnibus regulator, like CERTIN has jurisdiction over all entities and they can call for information, they can do investigations and so on. So for cybersecurity, that kind of broad jurisdiction exists with CERTIN, but sectoral regulators have their own defined jurisdiction, and then it gets transmitted through contractual arrangements. The third point is among the several cognitive biases, there is a bias called hindsight bias, where everything in hindsight looks perfectly explainable, and then there are always questions raised why it could not have been prevented, etc., which is a known bias, and that needs to be kept in mind when one is looking back. So the regulation does now contain elements of crisis management, and those expectations have to be met by creating crisis management plans, by doing regular enactments of those plans. And in fact, just to give an example from banking, there are drills being carried out which involve multiple banks together, acting on a script of a crisis having happened, and then how they are going to deal with that crisis as it unfolds. And that includes media interactions and so on. These exercises have been carried out. They have become better because with one exercise experience, the next exercise becomes that much better. There is actually guidance about creating red teams for organizations which are progressing to that level of maturity that they can invite now specialized attackers to attack them and then improve their systems further. So this is how it will build up in terms of capability, in terms of experience, and in terms of what can be done better. As you will know, in a recent case in the US, when a large number of records were taken out, there was a lot of gaps are observed in terms of how the customers were informed, what kind of domain name was registered, what kind of responses were happening. Finally, people who were involved in that had to leave those jobs. So these are all a learning process, which I am sure all organizations are absorbing and improving their own crisis plans. And that I think that is the way to go.
Sudhir, where would you come in on this?
So first thing is educating the organization about what the incident response process should be, right? Just to react on the previous point, security is in a fast-moving environment. Security organization is looked as a friction maker rather than as an enabler. So making that mind shift in the leadership is the first step. Unless you get buy-in, it's only the one corner of the org that is doing this, and the rest of the organization is happily, wreaking havoc and doing damage. So you need to build systemic constructs, constantly educate, either through gamification of the process. We've taken innovative approaches in the company to educate the wider dev community and developer community within the company, as well as the general employees. Sensitivity of information. How do you, what could happen? So what if scenarios?
I have a specific question for you. Security has always been seen as an expense from an enterprise point of view,
Right.
without realizing how important the role it plays till an incident actually takes place, and then there is a lot of business loss or business disruption. So how do you get the buy-in of your management?
When I was in Amazon, there was this terminology that was used called red asphalt, which is basically when you go get your license, right? You are showing, shown accident videos where you say this is what could happen. So a similar kind of a little bit of fear does a lot of good than harm. So you got to show real possibilities. You actually need to show what are the things that could be done without too much effort to break the systems. So a little bit of that, and then you also need to posture it differently for different parts of the organization. For a developer community, it could be us being the face of the security community in all of India. That could be one way to prove it. And data integrity, you talk different language than compliance to make sure they are empathetic. That is, so you got to follow different tacks in different part of the organizations to get buy-in. So that is part of how we are approaching the problem. And ultimately, when the executive leadership sees it as an enabler and a true protector of the company value and customer trust, that is when you start to get in more trust and buy-in from them as well. So coming to the incident response, right? It's a hypothetical incident. I won't respond to how we would deal with it, but in terms of fire drills, Savarde was talking about fire drills that we could perform. Today we do business continuity is one kind of fire drill that we perform. So this is very similar to that. What would happen in such a situation? How should people act? Unless you get into exercising that at the organization level, and it should be similar to BCP certification. You would do incident response certification as well internally and say, we are in a good state. And then you also need to have the security team needs to be, CISO office needs to be in touch with the internal communications team, constantly updating on vulnerabilities, and this is how the external community.
I think you mentioned you also do a bug bounty program.
Yeah, we also do a bug bounty program that's currently private. We are in the process of thinking if it should be a public bug bounty program, but that kind of helps as well. We have our own internal suite of red team arsenal tests as well that we do for.
But you also mentioned that sometimes scaring the management is helpful. Yeah. So if these guys want to sort of help you scare them, would you be open to that?
No, I mean, that is part and parcel of the red team arsenal or the bug bounty programs. They are intended to show the mirror to the rest of the organization to say this is what could happen. And this is more in a controlled environment. We are doing this in a controlled environment, but some of the outputs or some of the bugs that are found from the bug bounty program need to be socialized in the Information Security Council. We have an Information Security Council, just like everybody, all big companies, where we show all the security incidents, whether they are really minor or major. So these need to be continuously called out as to what is happening on the ground, and not blind trust.
Do you, ma'am, have a mechanism for sharing the threats that you find and the kind of, say, malicious IPs or any other kind of vulnerabilities, etc.? Is there a structural way to share that information with your everybody else in the ecosystem?
With the top management and within the top leaders of ITS, it does not go across to the entire organization, because somewhere we don't want to tell that details to everybody. So there is definitely a structured way in which we communicate every month to the top management, saying that these things is what we have observed last month on the network. And we also tell the same thing to the IT leaders. Continuing with the earlier discussion points, what I think is the commitment at the top is absolutely there, because they read about these things. There is actually no need to scare them, because when they read newspapers, they're already scared.
But you said that newspapers shouldn't be scaring people. So I'm getting confused signals from you.
I know. Even the factual reporting, even the factual reporting is enough to make them understand that things are going wrong in the world. So we need to protect. Security is important. So that one thing I would give to the media and the social media both, because they are propagating the news. The only problem here is that when they add in the extra spices to that to make it look more than what it actually is. So within the limits, it's very good. So the top management is absolutely solved into this idea. I personally face problems when it comes to the next levels, where the actual execution has to happen, because people were used to doing things in a particular way. Then suddenly if you say that, no, you have to take care of security and now privacy also, they go bonkers. What the hell is happening now? Because we have been doing this all these years and there was no problem. And suddenly you tell us all these things. So I don't have the manpower to do this. I need just an additional set of people who can do this and things like that. So the difficulty that I'm facing right now is that commitment that I'm finding at the top is not really percolating downwards. So maybe we'll have to find some innovative ways in which we can make them understand that it is really to be taken seriously. It's not an add-on thing. So that's where I find a challenge right now.
Sudhir, you wanted to raise something with her?
Yeah, that false sense of comfort, I think to the executive leadership or the top level leadership, they're scared to some extent. And the people on the ground, they always have the good intentions to be secure and to implement secure coding practices, or secure, safe, physical safety or security are also followed. But I think it's somewhere in between, right? Getting the middle management and buy-in in terms on how to prioritize business as usual and business priorities with a new way, and evolve the security strategy. That is where the buy-in is a little harder. And I think I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I was talking to some of the OEMs recently in a certain customer advisory meeting. So what I suggested is, see, we who are full-time practitioners of security, we know about it, but we need to also include at least some people who are not full-time practitioners, but they have a really major role to play when it comes to security in their own functions. If we can get those people also into such forums, maybe we just pick them out of whatever they're doing and just show them a different view from a different angle. Maybe they will understand. I don't know. This is one thing that I think we should try.
So I have a question for you, and maybe Sudhir could also. You've heard what Mr. Sarvade has said from a regulatory perspective, and the challenges that they have and the huge responsibility they carry. My question to you is that as CISOs or people who have spent most of your professional lives in security, could you be a little more proactive? For example, let's look at data. Your business was about capturing a whole lot of data of customers and so on and so forth. But why did it have to be the government to come up with a data protection regime? Could all of you from a security standpoint have been more proactive and started this discussion around data protection as a legal framework, say 10 years ago? What prevented you from doing that?
I don't have an answer. I think we should have done that. Mistake from our side. There should be more participation from our side. We are so tied down with our own actions, maybe our own targets or whatever we do day in and day out. We sometimes fail to think beyond. We fail to help the government in its initiatives. In smaller forms, people have started doing it. I think we should do more. somewhere, we have to leave what we do otherwise and do something for the public-private partnership, as people call it. I think it's time we do that.
Sudhir, would you like to comment on this?
I don't have a lot to add on this.
Or
but-
let me put it this way, that you are a developer. You've been essentially at heart, you've been developers even if you're security developers. But every time you build a piece of technology, you can also see that it will have positive implications, it will also have negative implications. So moment you spot that, shouldn't you be a little more proactive, which will then ease the burden on regulators to an extent?
I don't think it's an either or. Security is, there's no compromise here. In terms of, we sell goods, we don't own the goods that we sell. We source the goods from somewhere and we sell. At the end of the day, we are a marketplace where we are facilitating connecting to the customer. So what is the real thing that we own? It's customer trust. So if you lose customer trust, there's nothing else left. So from that perspective, I think we have been working from that assumption and on that principle proactively. Like I said in my opening sentence, regulation helps bringing that structure. So for us, it has been an enabler and a thought-provoking way to structure that. Sometimes it becomes constraining in a very fluid environment like ours because it feels a little too much to do for a company of our size or a company of our complexity. Sometimes, a company of, let's say, 5 lakh people, if you impose it on a company of 10,000 people, the same regulations, those need to scale. You need to kind of be able to pick and choose the things that resonate with the customer trust piece very overtly and go after those and then get to the next.
So would it help if you had a tech policy team sitting inside Flipkart?
We do have.
You have a tech policy team.
Yeah, and the tech policy team is in the we are consulting with some of the big 3 to help get that. But we don't get any help from there. We need to kind of interpret let's say, we are in the process of doing ISO 27001 certification, which is something that our board agreed to do because they realized that this is a big company and we have a lot of data. And then we got to grow beyond our startup roots. But then interpreting the ISO 27001 rule book is probably a multi-year roadmap, and we can't get to all of it. So the tech policy framing has helped quite a bit in that perspective. I also wanted to make one more point. The real act of securing, there's always bleeding edge attacks that are happening. There are new attack vectors that are emerging. So regulation seems to be on the backside in terms of getting to a baseline. But to your point, it is actually not. It's with the limited resources that we have, it is probably preventing us from investing more in discovering those kinds of attack vectors. In a resource-constrained environment, that could be a drag rather than a help.
So I'll have one last final question to my panelists, and then we'll open it up to questions. So we've heard so much about regulation, but somewhere over-regulation, etc., also starts impacting real, meaningful cybersecurity. So what would your advice be? That what are the things we need to do besides the compliance and regulation to actually achieve meaningful cybersecurity, depending on the kind of organization you are?
So in many ways, good regulation, which is updated as required, is a necessary but not sufficient condition. It is so because if somebody is taking a compliance approach, it is easy to meet the compliance expectations without really benefiting security much. And the standards like PCI DSS, ISO 27001, they are good to have, but they're just a starting point. So teams need to go beyond that. What I see as an issue, which is common across the Indian scenario, is the commitment to security. So I think recently government also gave guidance about how much percentage of the IT budget should be spent on cybersecurity. So that's a good guidance. But the investments also should benefit the organizations in the manner which is the most cost-effective one. So sometimes you see investments being made, but not really changing the security posture much. So why this happens? This happens because the the people element in cybersecurity always receives less attention than required. So if you have good teams, those teams are properly structured. Especially in government organizations, it's very difficult to get people because of the recruitment policies and so on. Internal talent is many times not adequate. So there are some systemic constraints which are there. Those need to be overcome by having better HR policies and so on. And then organizations should collaborate more. I think if everybody is working in silo, that may not be adequate against a determined attacker who is using maybe nation state backing or something which is organized crime, which can be very effective. So the sharing of information among the players is something which will also really help. So things can start from regulation, but they need to go much beyond. That is where we'll get a better assurance than what we are seeing today.
Like as Maya pointed out, sir, she said that every time she's aware of a major breach or a threat, she immediately informs the top management, but she wouldn't be in a position to go beyond her own top management. And yet information sharing, as we have all found out, is very, very important for the ecosystem, because many of the attackers, as you said, could be nation state backed, which has a malicious intent. So can the government or should the government facilitate this anonymized information sharing so that she is not compromised and yet the threat intelligence goes out to all the relevant stakeholders?
Absolutely. I think there is already a discussion about sectoral certs or ISACs in an earlier context, and that needs to come into being and start becoming effective, because there is always a build-up time which will be there. That is something which is very much required. The other thing which I think individual companies cannot do is looking at the dark web and what kind of intelligence is available there, because it requires deep skills, it requires maybe going around some rules and so on. So it is best done by at the national level, and then that feed can be given to concerned organizations. So we need to build that infrastructure quickly, and then that will really be helpful.
Sudhir, what can we do to achieve meaningful cybersecurity?
I think it needs to be, like you said, communicating the attacks among the community, and not only within the management. There should be an organizational channel to communicate the sensitivity and the context with context for the particular organization. And then there's a central database of security incidents and zero-day attacks. All of those should be, the communication mechanism needs to be streamlined. These are good ways to evangelize and raise awareness. And then couple that with, probably when different policies are framed, new policies are framed, they need to be, I'm not sure if this is a good way to do this, but what I would say is at least the Venn diagram between where is the overlap. If that could be explained well, that will help smaller companies still embrace regulation rather than resist regulation. So it's not mind-boggling for them to parse through all the jargon.
Maya, to achieve meaningful cybersecurity and going beyond regulation, what would you see that needs to be done?
A lot more still to be done in a lot of companies, I would say. One thing, I don't know if it is possible for the regulation to say, as we discussed offline today, if the regulators can say that if your technology spend is so much, some percentage of it should go into security spend also, because it's absolutely impossible to achieve security without spending anything. Believe me, it's not possible at all. So sometimes you have to work on very wafer-thin budgets for security, because they don't see the return on investment immediately, and nor can we show that. How do you show the ROI for a security training session given to an admin? You can't show it in terms of numbers. So if the regulator, I don't know, but if it is possible, then it's going to help us big time, because we know that it works, but we are somehow not able to convince them that it will work, provided we are ready to invest at the right places at the right time.
And would you also advise a more joint approach to regulation where your concerns are taken on board before the regulation is passed?
They do that. To a large extent, they do that, but they're all disjoint. A regulator works independently. I don't think TRI ever does anything without absolutely consulting a TSP. They do that. Then certain will come with something else. Then NCI APC will come with something else. Luckily, we are not under the RBI now, so But then if these guys can talk to one another in our presence or in our absence, whatever, they say that, okay, this is a set of common things that all of us are going to say. Otherwise, it will be too overwhelming to look at like hundreds of points from each regulator, even though the actions to be taken are one and the same. So if they can come back and simplify it from their side itself, because there are only as many regulators in this country. So it's quite doable that way. So if they say that these are the common set of 100 things that you should do, on top of that, each regulator will have a domain specific, say 50 things more to do, which makes it doable. And rather than giving it like sheets and sheets of written paragraphs, if they can give a checklist, that also helps us so that, this is the monthly thing that we will comply and we will report back. And it goes on in autopilot. There is no concern at all there. So this is something which is missing, and I think it is quite doable. We'll have to spend some time and energy on this. But if it happens, then I think the lives of all of us will become better.
And that's an excellent point, that if they can have a single window approach to you, it reduces the burden on you and you can spend more energies and resources on real cybersecurity.
On real cybersecurity things, yeah.
So now we'll have questions, and if you could identify yourself, I see a hand there, so if you can pass on the camera. There, Amit, there. And any other hands if you can show me, yeah, so I'll just come back to you.
Hello.
If you could identify yourself.
I'm Pallab Ganguly, coming up from a power utility company, Calcutta Electric Supply. Well, I have already discussed some points with Maya at Infocom regarding Infocom Kolkata, and we have discussed there in a panel about this regulatory regime. Now my point, I have two questions, one from Mr. Saravade, that under the IPC Act, according to the Indian Penal Code, I think there should be some punishments for these cybersecurity breaches. So why does the government doesn't bring up these things into the public openly? Because in this case, some regulators as well as the users or the hackers, they should be punished. There should be some legal actions taken. So what are your thinkings on that? And the second question to Maya is that we have already discussed at Infocom, just to Shoykot, I'm just bringing up the issue. The issue was to have a proper service level agreement, SLA, between the end users and the regulators. So the regulators have to be more positive in bringing down these service level agreements. That's all.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, so the question of deterrence through proper action against cyber criminals has been is being discussed for a long time, and so there are a couple of issues. One is the attribution issue, the kind of obfuscation which is available to the attackers, and the kind of hops they can take before landing is something which makes it very difficult practically. The other part is the framework for international collaboration on law enforcement investigation is itself very rudimentary. And there has been some talk about it, but I have not seen, this is my favorite topic of pet peeve, that 2005 when I joined NASSCOM, I was pushing for Budapest Convention, joining of the Budapest Convention. It has still not happened. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So only recently that cyber security is becoming a mainstream topic. Till now it was a very niche area. So hopefully things will improve. But I am still, even if that ideal regime were to come about, it will still miss out many incidents which will never be brought to book because of the sheer proliferation of devices, users, the impact that it can have. So only the high impact things will be taken up, etc. But it's a long way.
Maya, the question about SLAs?
See, the SLA is usually between a person who provides service and a person who consumes service. So you said between regulator and the end user. I am not too sure if the end user is consuming. You mean between the consumer and the service provider? See, any telecom service provider is only providing a channel. What you do within the channel is your problem. Okay, we are not supposed to look into that. Yeah, that's correct. We give the IP, but we have no reasonable control over what you do because we are not even supposed to look at it. We save those information for a lawful interception, but other than that, we don't have a visibility into that. So if you use that to do something wrong for the nation, it is for the government to take care of. We can provide all the logs so that they can investigate, but we cannot ensure that a person who's using our data does not do anything wrongful.
In fact, it would probably be illegal for you to look at it. So that is the limitation. I saw some hands here. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Myself, Smith Gonzalez, a security researcher. I just wanted to ask question to Nandakumar sir. So the role of FinCERT and what kind of regulations have been brought up by the FinCERT and how you are sharing the logs and the stuff with the FinCERT since the FinCERT has been come in picture 6 months back, if I'm not wrong.
So the insert CERT-FIN, as it is termed, announcement was made in the budget last year, that was in February 2017. And a working group was set up under the chairmanship of DG CERT. And there are multiple representatives from various regulators and other people, experts. The report was published in May 2017. And it is under process with the ministry, and they will take a decision on what should be the scope of the CERT-FIN and where it will be set up and the funding model and those kind of things. So that is the work in progress.
And a question to the panel, that is last question, that is, what are your policies over a state-sponsored activity and what kind of strategic controls have you been placed on for that point?
I think that's a whole panel discussion, so we'll move on to that. I saw some hands here. Yeah, this way.
Hi, my name is Hari Prasad. I came from Dubai to attend this. I'm a CISO for one of the local banks in Dubai. When the panelists are discussing, I observed that getting the top management support is always a concern. Is it fundamentally something wrong in the organizational structure where only the technical people becoming a CISO? That is the first question. And from the regulator's perspective, do we need to put the CISOs at certain level where they can take a business decisions? These are the two questions.
In fact, that's an excellent question, sir. We were discussing that last night.
Yeah, so I think the top management's understanding, I would not say understanding, but the awareness of cybersecurity as an important area has been going up. In fact, I saw some survey yesterday which says it is the #1 topic for the US boards at least. So that is something which is there, and these incidents which result into CEOs losing their jobs, and a couple of companies have already, where it has happened, also kind of contributes that process. And I think a lot of work needs to be done because boards, as they exist, are constituted in a very traditional manner. So in a listed company, the shareholders will choose and so on. Many times, these are people who have retired after a long executive life, and they are now in advisory role and they are part of the board. So sometimes their understanding of what is happening on the ground itself is out of date. And with technology changing so fast, the understanding of the risk the technology is generating itself is low. So I don't expect too many boards to have very specialized people already there, but boards can be briefed and taught because they are people with a lot of experience. They can orient themselves in a particular direction. In Revit, we are running a forum called Business Leaders Forum, which just had its meeting last month, where we invited the CEOs of banks and the independent directors of bank boards to come and be briefed about cybersecurity. And we had a good inaugural meeting, and we intend to run it on a quarterly basis. And that is something which is happening. But I'm sure in all other industries, boards are getting briefed about this risk and preparing about that particular risk.
Sudhir and Maya, could you also come in on this?
Yeah, I think what is more important is that the board is aware and the board is able to mandate that buy in and mandate the same back to the entire leadership team. So of course it is always optimal for the CISO to directly report to the CEO, which is what I guess you are implying. But it depends on and if a technical person is reporting or not is the other thing you're making. In a company like Flipkart, which is a technology first company, the CEOs are pretty tech savvy. So a tech CISO is able to communicate easily with the CEO. But it should be based on the composition of the executive team, and the more important part is the structure is put in place from the board and at the top leadership level, and the communication channels are open between them. I think the org structure itself is probably less helpful in this regard.
On the reporting lines, I just want to make a quick intervention. There's already regulatory guidance given that the CISO must not report to the head of technology and must report to head of risk, which separates the conflict of, sorts out this conflict of
Maker and
interest.
checker.
Yeah, and the second part is whom should the CISO report also is now provided as a regulatory guidance. And it is a senior person at the top management level who is to be the direct reporting officer of the CISO, especially in the banking is concerned.
That is news to me.
Maya, if you could.
The understanding of the top management, I think, is good because they understand, they are very intelligent, they understand these things. Sometimes they act as if they don't understand because they don't want to invest more, but otherwise they do understand, absolutely, yes. And reporting should not ideally matter. And there are a lot of companies, banks I've seen wherein the CISO is not a hardcore techie, okay? So you get a mix of everybody there.
So I have a question.
If you could identify yourself.
Yeah, this is Krishna. I work on security product development. I've come from Bangalore to attend this. It's a good conversation. One question I have is, when it comes to the regulatory assessment and follow-up, all that, we are focusing most on private companies. Where does the government companies come? Most of the government websites, take it for example, EPFO or anything, they run on like non-secure ports. They still run HTTP. I have tried to report in my company so many times why these things are not secure. How does the regulator regulate security of the government organizations where many of the companies do a lot of data they share with them of employees and stuff of that nature, which are very, very critical. So how exactly the regulation?
This is a very interesting question. If they as a researcher suddenly finds a major vulnerability, how do they get in touch? And sometimes you also find where organizations are not even ready to accept that something has been found. How do you deal with this?
I think the question is particularly about government sites. This is where we feel the lack of Mr. Behel amidst us.
We'll grill him tomorrow.
The reason is the private companies we can trust. They have the machinery in order to take care of the sensitivity, all that. Of course, the breach does happen and it's better handled. But the government, so we don't know what exactly is happening.
Maya, with your extensive experience, would you like to come in on this?
See, again, you're coming back to that point. Okay, I'm not very happy about it.
So we have time for one last question there.
Yeah, in the interest of time, we'll take last question.
Sorry, last question. This is.
I'm Sanjay Goyal. I've come. We are a startup with the name of Bulwark CyberX. I'm from Jaipur. I just wanted to know, for banking, you have a regulator. For telecom, you have a regulator. But does SEBI regulate this thing for other companies? We are from Goa right now. Here in Goa, a lot of pharmaceutical companies which have patents, formulas, things like that, and other companies. Is SEBI doing some regulation on those concerns? Because this is very critical for the country's infrastructure. We have such a big pharmaceutical industry here in India. We have about 12% of the world production.
But what is the IT or cybersecurity angle to that question?
Because they have all their formulas, things in the...
So basically saying information security.
Yeah, information security.
So SEBI's jurisdiction is limited to listed companies. It doesn't extend to all companies.
It's okay for BSE 500.
For other companies, the MCA has the supervisory authority. But for listed companies, SEBI has issued cybersecurity guidance, not for the companies themselves, but for these infrastructure institutions. So that is where I think the current level of focus is. And I think the SEBI is going to be part of the CERT-FIN, which will be set up for the financial sector, which markets is a very important one. So I think that will get addressed, but the distinction between SEBI's jurisdiction and the MCA's jurisdiction is something we'll need to keep in mind.
In whose jurisdiction will this come? the information security matter? MCA or SEBI?
If it is a listed company, it will be SEBI.
SEBI.
And the default regulator, as we know, is certain will always have a role everywhere.
So if you look at Section 70B of the Information Technology Act, you will get to see the subclauses which define certain will tell you what kind of responsibilities certain will have the power to impose on all the entities. 70B of the IT Act. So with that, I want to thank my panelists. This was a privilege to have such a distinguished set of speakers on the panel and also some excellent questions from all of you. So thank you so much.